I think Jake Paul, I mean, he won.
Yeah.
That's just it. I mean, call it how you see it. Like, Tyron Woodley walked in there, and even though we all called for him to win last week, like, he lost. He
Yeah,
lost. Like,
badly.
it's just crazy. It's shocking to see. And the real messed up part about all of it is I believe Jake Paul won because of Tyron Woodley being how he was later on in his UFC career, which is inactive.
See, this is my thing, right? I At some point, right, we have to give some, like, we can't just sit and say like, okay,
You have to give him
discredit.
credit.
Yeah, we can't discredit every opponent and then say like, oh, he could be this, but blah blah blah. Like this time, I have to give him his credit because even though Tyron Woodley has a record of being inactive and not and being, as many would say, he's very gun shy when he's fighting now, right? He had moments in this fight within like the fourth and fifth round and parts of the sixth round where he had some explosiveness to him. He was tagging Jake Paul. He actually put Jake Paul practically through the ropes if he could have, but I mean, the ring had there was a thing with the ropes nonetheless, right? But we saw where Jake Paul just literally leans all the way back, and even at some point you saw where when Jake Paul's hitting Tyron Woodley, he's taking the shots and saying, "Let's go." So it's like I got to give Jake Paul some credit because he found a way of keeping him at bay. He was hitting him with combinations. He did catch Tyron Woodley a couple times, but at the same time, it's like the reason why Tyron Woodley lost in his case is because he was gun shy. But at the same time, we have to give Jake Paul his credit nonetheless.
Of course.
Yeah, like that's just how I see it. Like, I mean, but nonetheless, it's unfortunate because I think none of us last week would have ever guessed that this would have been the end result because it was a very definitive fight. I had I don't think Tyron Woodley won a round until like the fourth round. Like he was getting tagged, stayed out on the outside, didn't have any chance for at all from what it looked like, man.
I just think that I gave Jake Paul the fight. I gave him 6 rounds to 2, honestly. I gave Tyron the fourth round. Obviously, everybody gave him the fourth round.
Right.
And I gave him one of the later rounds. I want to say 7th or 8th. I gave him 2 rounds. I think the problem with Tyron Woodley is the fact of his timidness. And he even explained it on Errol Hawani show that the reason why he didn't go for the kill more is because in the Vicente Luque fight, his last MMA fight, was he had Vicente Luque on the ropes. He was, he hit him hard and he was blitzing in, and Vicente Luque caught him with a counter. And then Tyron Woodley was on Dream Street until he fell into a guillotine or dart. So I have to go back and see what submission he got him on. And he said, so it made him more timid for going for a kill shot. And I kind of look at it like that's his excuse. But that's what also made him fail in the fight. He didn't throw many jabs out there. He only landed 11 jabs while Jake landed 30 plus jabs. And that was the difference. Jake won off a point because he actually boxed, right? I don't think Jake did anything in the fight where it was like, oh, well, he's the better fighter. And then when watching that fight, it looked like, man, Woodley is the better fighter, but Woodley's actually not utilizing his strengths. Woodley was always walking forward. He was always the one trapping Jake in the corner, but he just wouldn't pull the trigger that much. And when he did pull the trigger, and it was like 50-50. Okay, he would miss or it would land, but he wouldn't. And on the ones that would land, he wouldn't follow up on anything. He'll just be like, he'll stop and freeze and let Jake get out the corner. And I don't get that because I was like, yo, this guy doesn't want to. Jake is not going to stand toe to toe with you, right? And the name of the game is not slugfest and blood sport, it's boxing. So I get the fact he's not going to. But obviously, Jake is respecting your power and your skill set enough where he's on that for all 8 rounds. He was on the back foot.
Yeah.
He was for all breakdowns. He was in the back for throwing a counter overhand right. He'll do a double jab and a counter overhand right, and then he was doing that the whole fight. And to me, it was a little frustrating to watch Tyron fight because I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why are you? I understand you don't want to get caught with a punch and get knocked out or nothing, and I get that. But be more assertive. If he's more assertive, Tyron could have walked away with a decision. But the fact that he was just so timid and he didn't do much outside of those 2 rounds, Jake won the fight. He won the fight off of points. He won the fight because he was able to land more punches and capitalize on Tyron not throwing anything that much. That's what the name of the fight was. If Tyron threw as much as Jake did, Jake would have lost that fight. And I'm not mad at Jake, right? I'm not a Jake Paul fan, but I'm not mad at Jake because Jake did what he needed to do to secure a victory. And Tyron coming out crying, want a rematch? You see my face? I was about to knock you out. Nah,
that's the truth, though.
And his brother Logan said it best, or it could have been Jake, but I thought it was Logan at the time. He's like, you had your chance, bro. You had 8 rounds. Yeah, that now the trajectory for Jake is going up, and that's another conversation. Woodley, he's sitting there going on Ariel's show, going on these other places, Instagram Live, begging for the rematch. Yeah, I'm gonna get. You look down sad. You look like you're down bad. You know, and kudos to Woodley though. He did get his biggest paycheck of his fighting career, $2 million to. He got a $2 million purse. Obviously, he's going to get more money from the pay-per-view side of things. So he got multi-millions for this fight, and good for him. Because he did get his biggest check of his career, despite what Dana White was saying, So shouts out to Woodley for that. And shouts out for Jake for providing that opportunity for him. But I think Woodley, man, if Woodley can't get this rematch, I think he needs to hang it up because he's not going to be good against a competent boxer. And now if he fights an MMA fighter who's trying to box, Woodley can win, but nobody wants to see that.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is I think that rematch would be good for both of them because I feel like they're 2 boxers that seem to be right around the same level of boxer because it's like at the end of the day, while Tyron probably could have done better, he didn't do better. So it's like he went in there and he lost the way he lost because Jake Paul he was just fighting a better fight than him. Or Tyron Woodley didn't fight the best fight he could have. Regardless, he lost. So it's like, to me, I feel like a fight between the 2 of them could be good because it's like, hey, all y'all can do is get better, essentially, and y'all are getting better together, except y'all are actually fighting to win. So I think it could be beneficial for both of them, seeing as Jake Paul is trying to get more opponents, and I would think that Tyron Woodley is trying to do the same.
Yeah, I mean, I partially agree there, right? Okay. Because I think for them, because I do agree where we are seeing right now, he's on a campaign of begging for a rematch, right? He's going on Instagram and on Instagram Live saying, hey, they're just behind Floyd Mayweather versus Logan Paul. And if they surpass them, they'll be the 5th largest pay-per-view of all time, right? He's saying he's saying whatever to like let people know, like, hey, I'm happy with the numbers, whatever. It's cool.
As he should be, though.
He should be because he's made a huge payday. And that was a big complaint that he used to have in the UFC, which always made me dislike him because though I thought he was a great fighter, he always complained. He was always a fighter that complained, which trust me, I understand you should know your worth, right? And if you want to say like, listen, I'm the champion, I need this, this, and this, and you're not getting it, cool. But as a fan, I'm not a big fan of it, right? But back to this, right? My thing is this. I think a rematch is more beneficial for Tyron because if he loses, if he walks around with this loss, it kind of is like this big stain on his record, right? Where you're this heavily acclaimed champion, you have your accolades in college and in professional sports, but now you're at a point where you're, how can I put it? You've lost, you pretty much, all that kind of gets wiped away in a sense where it's like you did all of this just to lose to a kid that was on Disney. And now he's a YouTuber that decided to be a boxer, right? Who's only has 4 fights in his whole career. So it's like it doesn't wipe everything away, but it leaves us it puts a stain of like how we all see the fighters go off into the sunset. It's many times they don't get to leave on their own accord. The game typically retires them. This is a bad way.
I look at it like this. That's a fight that Jake Paul he should have won, but due to Tyron, you know, with his bad habits, he gave Jake Paul the best career win that he could have ever dreamed of, right? Nice. Up to this point. So I look at it as like, if he doesn't get the rematch with Jake to right this quote unquote wrong, I don't think he should move forward. The only reason why people cared about this fight because of Jake. If this was, hey, Woodley retire for MMA and he's going to fight some low level boxer, yeah, people will tune in. It wouldn't have, but it wasn't going to bring the attention that Jake Paul brings.
Right.
And I just feel like that Woodley he better hope that the stars align and God is like, hey, I'm going to give you what you want, the rematch. Because if that doesn't happen, I think the Woodley boxing career is done.
Honestly, I think it's done already. To be honest with you, I think if he has a rematch, I'm not going to say that. Like we all agree that it's because he's gun shy, and that's why he lost, right? My thing is this: I don't know what to. After seeing what I saw, and we know he has a history of this in the UFC as well. Like in his last few fights before he left the company, he was becoming more gun shy as a fighter also. So my thing is, it's tricky because if he fights a professional fighter, it's like, okay, we already saw you. If you're gun shy with a YouTuber and with people in your own sport, imagine you fighting someone that who's not even big in the ranks, just an up and coming fighter who has maybe 50 amateur fights. He's going to box your head off because no one wants to see it. Yep. And my thing is also, the tricky part is that gunshot thing. That's not something that's a mental thing. Yeah. So I agree. And for him to get over that, he's got to push himself into essentially darker waters, right? Yeah. And I don't think, in terms of his legacy, I think that's really dicey to do against someone like Jake Paul, because I mean, granted, this kid isn't someone he's not no super aficionado kid that's a boxer that's great, but he only can get better with time as long as he trains and he looks for certain things, right? If he the more he understands from the sport, the easier it gets in terms of knowing what to throw, right? And my thing is this: long story short, in order for Tyron not to be so gun shy, he's going to have to lean himself into maybe being a little over aggressive, and being a little over aggressive could get him countered.
Which is what he tried to do against Vicente Luque. And, you know, that's all. I think he needs to, if he could do it against Jake Paul, I don't think it gets easier for Tyron. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that's why if he were to fight somebody next, it would just make sense if he fought Jake Paul next and actually did that with Jake Paul.
Right. Yeah, I agree that he should fight Jake. I agree that for him, the best fight is Jake Paul. For Jake Paul, I don't think is necessarily that he has to have a rematch.
Yeah, for Jake, he does it. Jake, he has, hey, man, I beat you. You know,
right, exactly.
I beat you. I can move on to the next sham of a fight. I don't need to, pull. So, like, I just look at it like, and I'm going to give Jake Paul some credit, right? When he got put through the ropes, and it should have been scored a knockdown, but when he got put through the ropes, instead of him kind of like folding, he's like, okay, I lost. Yeah, I could have got knocked out, but thank God for the ropes. But I'm gonna come back here the next few rounds and just try to survive. And that's what he did. And he landed some more jabs, and he did the double jab overhand right counter that praying for the best. Hey man, I could throw overhand right now. You know what I'm saying? but like for Jake, I think that for him, the world is in his hands right now, right? But at the same time, he might book himself into a corner because let's say he takes another MMA fighter. Hey, I'm going to fight an MMA fighter who is really known for striking now, right? He might be able to get away with one more pay-per-view like that. But people don't want that anymore. They want him to actually fight a boxer now. And they're not clamoring for him to fight a Canelo. Obviously, that's just way beyond his league. But hey, Jake, fight somebody who's your level, but who's actually been boxing, who actually boxer. So if him versus Tommy Fury is a good matchup for Jake, because if Jake wants to be taken seriously and not as a scam and sham artist, then he does need to fight low-level boxers, because if he beats Tommy Fury, right, then now it's kind of like, okay, all right, so we have to take him seriously as a boxer now, because Jake is now fighting and beating boxers his level. Now, he can, it depends how serious he wants his career to be. Now he could work his way up the ladder, and now, you never know. If he is super serious, we could see Jake Paul fighting for a world title in the future if he's serious about the competition he's fighting. But as long as he keeps dipping and dodging and finding these fights that he can win, no one is ever going to take the dude seriously. You know what I mean? I think the Tommy Fury fight is the fight he should go for if he wants credibility and respect. But if he wants to sell a pay-per-view and get some money, then yeah, do the Tyron Woodley rematch or fight an MMA fighter who's not out of their prime. I think that's it. And not a Conor McGregor. We're talking about somebody who's your size, bro. Because that's another thing about Jake Paul that people love to ignore. He's fighting guys beneath his weight class. Yeah, Tyron Woodley weighed 189 and a half for the fight. But here's the thing. Tyron Woodley is a welterweight fighter in mixed martial arts, which is 170 pounds. His walking around weight is the 190 pounds. So I feel like, once again, he fought a guy that wasn't his size, and he almost got knocked out by the guy. So I look at it as like, he needs to start fighting people his size, and he needs to start fighting low-level boxers like himself for anybody to start respecting him. Yeah, we respect the fact that you've been training for 3 years. Yeah, we respect the fact that you got in the ring. We're not respecting the competition you're facing because it's all a ruse. Because you know what it is? It's borderline him picking guys from the streets and bringing them in the ring. That's what it kind of is. Borderline is like that.
Tyron was actual boxers.
Exactly. Tyron was his first real challenge, but even himself wasn't a real boxer. Prior to Tyron, he never had a real fight. You could technically speaking, Jake Paul is 1-0.
Yeah,
technically speaking,
I understand why you say that.
I trust me. I definitely understand what you mean, because I mean, to me, I really look at I don't really even look at him as a actual professional boxer. To me, I look at Jake Paul as just a celebrity boxer at this point, right? And to me, that's where I give the credibility to. Like, if he wants to be an actual boxer and professional, because I know that's his whole shtick of like, yeah, I want to actually help the sport and bring the sport and make it a competitive sport next to MMA. That's cool. But if you're fighting, like you said, if you're fighting MMA guys that are either out of their prime, you're fighting retired basketball players, you're fighting YouTubers as well, and you decide to fight a fighter that was a decorated fighter in his own sport and has his own record within college for whatever and shit like that. It's like, it's a difference. Like, if you want to fight and be a boxer, fight a boxer and fight someone that, like you said, him fighting Canelo, him fighting Amir Khan, him fighting Gennady Golovkin, all of those things are way out of his stratosphere because they're too much technically soundly better. He can try, but even like we saw with Floyd Mayweather when he fought Logan Paul, we can tell at many road stops, you can tell, hey, Floyd is carrying this guy. And when we talk about these other fighters, they are not Floyd Mayweather necessarily, but they are of like a certain echelon that may not be Floyd, but it's an echelon and maybe one or two below. Jake Paul isn't somewhere that's one or two below. He's at the very bottom. He's at the bottom. He's at the very bottom. And he has to work his way up to that point. And like you said, if he takes his opponent seriously, who knows in 8 years he could be fighting for a world championship.
Right.
It's very well possible if he's taking it serious and doing what's necessary for him. But if this is what he wants to do, then it's cool. But if he wants to be taken serious, or if he wants this to last for a long term, he has to actually start fighting real fighters. Because, like you said, it's one, maybe two more fights, if he's fighting MMA guys.
Well, the way I look at it is like this is all a gimmick. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, and the way the gimmick works is, hey, you need to fight either somebody who's equally on the level. I think honestly, like I was talking a lot about this earlier in the week. I think that the only two opponents that really make sense are the two opponents that have been laid out as we've been talking: Tommy Fury or Tommy Fury or Tyron Woodley, because I feel like those are just the only two fighters that make sense. Otherwise, the gimmick doesn't work. If he fights like Jorge Masvidal, it's like, oh, okay, why are you fighting another MMA fighter that's not a boxer? But you either need to fight another MMA fighter being Tyron, or you need to fight an actual boxer.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that at some point they're going to have to come. He's going to have to come to that crossroad of figuring out what he wants to do. Because I know not in the press conference, but after the fight was over with, and he was interviewed in the ring, and this is before Tyron had his chance to try to do a song and dance to try to get the rematch and say he would agree to do the tattoo. I know Jake Paul had stated that he wanted to actually take a break for a moment, which to me was just a red flag of like, hey, this show has stopped. This show has stopped. I more than likely, like you guys said, he has to figure out what his next two best options are, or what the best option is moving forward. So I don't know. I think we'll really have to see what comes of this in terms of what happens in terms of because whatever the next move he makes is the move that will determine like what he's really trying to do in the terms of the long term. In 5 years, do you still want to fight? Or is it just like hey, I'm grabbing some money, I'm stirring the pot, I'm shaking the waters, and now I got my money and I'm off down the yellow brick road. So
No, were you about to say something?
No, I agree with Spence. I agree with what he's saying, man. I just think the Jake Paul thing, it's cool for what it is, but at the same time, it's just until he actually fights somebody who is a boxer, and it could even be an amateur level boxer, and I think some amateur level boxers can beat Jake Paul up, honestly, because they're boxing for a living. They're not boxing for a show. So I look at it like, until he starts fighting somebody who actually is skilled in boxing, we have to just take him as a celebrity boxer doing joke fights. And he's only doing this as a gimmick. So